Thank you very much for joining me. Today's webinar is the H-1B CAB season strategies webinar. We're joined with some wonderful attorneys here, including attorney Jon Velie, attorney Elizabeth Ricci, and some others that could join us in conversation. I do want to hand over the mic to you, Jon, to kick us off at today's H-1B webinar.
Thanks, Pierre. Appreciate it. Elizabeth, thanks so much for joining us. Looks like we've got Florida covered, Texas and Michigan, and as well as Oklahoma. And nice to have people from different parts of the country weighing in. It's H-1B season coming up. Today is March 1st, 2024, if you're seeing this in the future. And in 6 days, or March 6th, we will start the registration for H-1Bs again for calendar year 2025. Which means jobs starting October 1st, 2024. Love to hear, Elizabeth, if you could just tell us a little bit about what you're thinking, either what we're going to see, process differentials, just anything you want to say, take a few minutes to tell us about H-1Bs from your perspective. And if you want, tell us a little bit about your practice as well.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you all. It's an honor. Well, I've been practicing 23 years, mostly employment-based immigration. This is going to be an interesting H-1B season. It's been interesting for the last few years. Congress refuses to give us a workable solution. So this quote upgrade is basically the best we're going to have, at least for a while. I have some concerns. I hate to log in at noon on the 6th when everybody else is logging in and worry about this crashing. But we don't have much of a choice. So many people are interested in doing this because there aren't enough visas and we're not educating enough people domestically in these STEM areas. So we have to do this. Right. So that's a concern. I'm concerned about logging in too late too, right? At the end of the window, is it going to crash because so many people are logging in at that point. So I'm concerned about that. It's not going to allow for families to be bundled. We can't use, we as attorneys won't be able to use our own software. So I have some technical concerns. I will not be filing the electronic way that it will soon allow for. I figure we'll let it, I'll do the registration that we're required to do, but I'm not comfortable with this right out of the gate.
Filing the H-1Bs themselves electronically.
Yeah, okay. Which this is a new change, that they're going to allow.
We want to do it. So it's interesting. I can totally, my knee jerk, I'm like you. I've been doing this 30 years, and the new things don't always work. We've seen them fail enough, right? Trying to get LCAs done when you're not getting your FIE number back, and that you can't file the H-1B without it. I mean, we've all had those nightmares over the years. We have a process, visas.ai, we developed, which is where we're building these things on a platform. We're kind of excited about taking that built thing and putting it into their thing, if it works. So what we have to do is, while we're stressing out about getting everybody registered and training a growth team to handle the increased volume that we'll have, we also have to learn a new system. And
you're a brave man.
Yeah, and don't know that if it's going to work or not. So yeah, I think you're right. Now, if it does work right, I mean, the FedEx costs that are so expensive go away. It gives us an extra day to file, because you can do it up until the last day, right? Are you going to try it at all, or are you just going to say, let's see what happens, and we're going to do it the way we know how to do? I'm
going to let you all try it and tell me how it goes, and the next year I'll do it.
Okay, well, fair enough, right? And as we're doing it, we're glad to keep you posted on what we learned.
Yeah, I'd like
we're having these webinars every week, right? As it done. This is new for us to do it this way. We've done this thing we call a collab for a while now, but this has been, why don't we talk about the H-1B every week? Because it changes every week, right? I mean,
it changed today, right? I just got a notice before I logged on about now they're not going to accept them at service centers anymore as of April 1st.
Tell us that. See, look, the breaking news, Pierre. Elizabeth says breaking news. Elizabeth, tell us what the breaking news is specifically. What did you learn? Where did you learn it? And what does it say?
I got the USCIS alert maybe 10 or 15 minutes ago. Okay. And it says that the paper versions will only be accepted by lockboxes and no longer service centers as of April 1st.
Okay. All right. Well,
which is another change that worries me.
Is it? Because if they don't get it, and it's not there in time, and right. Okay.
Right. They're a hot mess as it is. So now we're adding fee changes and filing changes. That makes me uncomfortable.
Okay, very good. All right, so let's move on to some other things. And I want to get Ashley and Yesh involved in the conversation. Great job, Pierre. Pierre's doing this on the run right here. He grabs a picture, makes a nice flyer. That's well done, Pierre. Thank you. Okay, so tell us a little bit of your concerns, Elizabeth. This is hot seat, right? This is hot seat lawyer. No, we did not prearrange this, ladies and gentlemen. We just got a lawyer on in front of us, and we're going to ask her, biting legal questions and see what she says. But actually, there'll be more softball than that. But from last year's concerns, let's say double registration, do you think that the new registration will solve that? Continue to have the same problems or have different problems, or what are your thoughts around that?
And you're speaking to me, John?
I'm talking to you, Elizabeth. Yes.
It's supposed to solve that, right? So now we're going from employer-centric to beneficiary-centric.
Right.
And of course, the reason for that is because people were gaming the system to try to get a visa. So now it's going to allow, because they're using that travel document or passport number as the identifier, and it's going to be that beneficiary who can have multiple applications, but they can only, so you're not going to have multiple employers filing for multiple applications for the one person. So that's going to allow that beneficiary to negotiate, because they can say, hey, John, I got selected. How much are you going to pay me? Hey, Pierre, I got selected, and negotiate that way. On the other hand, now the employer is going to be in a position where I got you this H-1B. What's to say that we don't go through with it, and now you port to somebody else because you're in the cap, and I've just lost all those filing fees and attorney's fees. So that's a concern. It is supposed to address the underlying issue of gaming the system. I just think it's going to create new issues that
it doesn't solve it. It just gives them more things to find reasons to deny, maybe, right? That's what I saw with last year. Let's go to this. And Yesh has become a great expert on this, answering RFE after RFE on this about companies. We represent a lot of companies, of staffing companies, right? And so there's a couple of different H-1B types of players out there, right? There are big companies like Amazon that have a job and to do it. There are companies that are not tech related, right? Like if we were to hire lawyers in our law firms, and then there's the staffing company deal. And the staffing company has been in the crosshairs of immigration since 2010, when the Neufeld memo came out. And every time they litigate and win, immigration seems to find another way to go after them for the same things. Immigration has decided that its cross to bear is the staffing relationship, right? Like that is the most heinous thing in the world, right? We're not talking about gun runners. We're not talking about drug dealers. We're talking about having a company in the United States, an American company, recruit, hire, pay, fly over, accommodate many times, and then place their employees on a project or projects, or work out of their own office, or work out of the remote locations on a project. And immigration just can't stand it. And they have tried to kill it through a case called Defensor, where they said the real employer is the Amazon project that they're on, and not the company that's employing them and doing all these other things. They used a lot of things, and then they got blown up with a case called IT Serve Alliance in 2020. And that case said, look, quit asking them these questions about their contracts with the third parties. Quit asking them about their itineraries. Their right to control is limited to their doing any of the things, hiring, firing, stuff like that. Quit asking these questions. Well, immigration actually settled that case after the court was very instructive on that. But the difficulty has been is that the U.S. consulates, even though the language was not limited to USCIS, because USCIS was the defendant, the consulates seem to think that they're not bound by that decision, even though the rationale is exactly the same. Quit asking them those things. So what we're seeing is 221Gs and clients being asked all these questions that USCIS is not allowed to ask, the consulates are. And moreover, FDNS is now putting investigators that are going over after approved visas are there and asking these questions they can't ask during the initial filing of the H-1B.
And contacting the attorney and not contacting the attorneys, even though they have a G28, going straight to the employer. I had that happen a couple of weeks ago.
I would love to hear some of that. So let's dig into that. So I'm setting the table for you, and yes, I want you to weigh in, but let's hear Elizabeth's horror stories. And please, Elizabeth, don't mention names. This is a public conversation, but you're totally permitted to talk about scenarios. Somebody did this, somebody did that. Just don't give the name of the beneficiary, the name of the petitioner,
of course,
anything like that. But I know you know that, but we don't want to make that mistake. Anyway, go ahead.
A couple of weeks ago, I had an H approved in last year's cap. Everything was fine. They've got a perm pending, and the beneficiary sent me an email saying, I got a call from a fraud officer asking for XYZ. What should I do? And I said, well, you should let me handle it. So I spoke to the employer and I said, I need to be on this call. And I contacted the fraud officer directly, gave him my phone number, gave him the G28, and tried to be diplomatic that I needed to be involved. He assured me I would be. And he called me that morning for the call and went to do the three-way and mistakenly didn't do the connection.
Oops.
So I wasn't on the call
Right.
after all. And I'm emailing both of them saying, you know, I'm here, what's going on? Luckily, everything was fine. But in that particular case, the person is Venezuelan, doesn't have a valid passport, which is going to be an issue this year.
Sure.
Because that's how they are identifying the applicants, by valid passport number. If you're Venezuelan and don't have, or wherever, but we're mostly seeing it for Venezuela, don't have a valid passport.
Right. Because the country's sort of.
Are you automatically going to be rejected? Now, I was on the call with USCIS last week. One officer said no, that they would be accommodations, but that's not what the policy says. It says you have to have a valid travel document. So we're going to see if Venezuelans and anyone else who doesn't have a valid passport is going to be disadvantaged by the new system.
So would Iran have the same problem?
Any place that is not renewing passports
is
going to have, or if you can't get it renewed because you have to go abroad to get it, that's going to be an issue.
Yeah, so it could be a practical issue. And so I saw in the regulations, and maybe this is why, but it wasn't just passports. It's and I think something they call a travel document. Those are still official documents issued by that country, right?
Right, but if it's not valid because they're making you go to Venezuela to get it, and you don't want to go because, you know, maybe you've got an asylum filed, or then you're not going to have that valid passport or travel document. But John, I want to go back real quick and just mention the irony of immigration with the staffing companies. Immigration uses contract employees. Those state governments use contract employees who are on H's. So our own government.
That an H-1B contractor denies a case for an H-1B contractor because they're an H-1B contractor. And while painful and ironic and amusing at some level, it's probably happening because of the policies that these folks are having to follow, that seem to be, there's too much of it to think that they're one-offs, right?
Well, it goes back to what I said originally. Congress refuses to modernize the system. So if we can't have a workable system, then we're going to piecemeal it. Yeah,
very good. Yesh, you're on. Tell us a little bit about some of the things you're seeing, and build on Elizabeth's, or take it wherever you want to take it. See, yes, we see your name, but I don't. Are you with us? Okay, put her on the spot, didn't I? Ashley, you got any some insights on what's coming up and what to think about? Anything from your perspective?
No, actually, I think these fraud things are really interesting to hear about. I know Yesh has been dealing with them a lot. That's too bad. She actually just messaged me and said she was talking.
Oh,
but so we can't hear her.
We can't. She's on mute right now, is what it says.
Yeah. Yeah, yes, you can still hear us. You're on mute.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, there you go.
I
Perfect.
Can't hear you.
No, we can hear you.
Hello?
Yeah, we can still hear you.
I'm so sorry. Give me one. I'm gonna leave and try to come back. Maybe that might help.
Yeah, probably. But you're totally vocal. I mean, but you can't hear us.
I don't think she could hear us.
Yeah.
But yeah, Yesh would definitely be the person to talk to about all the fraud stuff going on.
So I'm
And I
thinking,
know you've been working with her on those.
yeah, we have. And here's one of the things that I'm thinking that's really interesting, and I'd love to kind of bring this up with Elizabeth. So, the Supreme Court is going to look at the Chevron case again. The Chevron case, for anybody that's out there that is like, what the hell are you talking about? Is the case that gives agencies really, really broad discretion. What it does is it removes the ability for courts to look at everything that an agency does. Like, it gives them very wide discretion. All right. What I see is happening by immigration right now is a great abuse of discretion around this fraud issue. And here's what I mean by that. So I see that there's FDNS is an adjudicating body that was delegated some authority by Homeland Security to look at fraudulent questions. Basically, I think they have the right to look at beneficiaries. I think they've extended that to petitioners, and now we're seeing them extended even further. Commonalities, other petitioners, maybe even people that are helping on these cases. So with these, they're making findings of fraud, right? So what is fraud, right? Fraud is not just a word. I can't say that Ashley is a fraud because of her opinion on something on Facebook, and then the consulate would then screenshot that and say Ashley's a fraud, so we can't let her in the United States. That's not the standard, right? Fraud has two standards. One is a criminal standard. One is a civil standard. Donald Trump just was found liable for monetary damages under a civil fraud statute in the state of New York, right? That's not the same as criminal fraud. But how do the consulates use criminal fraud to turn somebody down? They use it because it's a crime, right? And it's a crime of moral turpitude, even if it's a misdemeanor, right? So all felonies are barriers to entry. Certain misdemeanors can be barriers to entry if they are moral turpitude. So fraud is one of that. So what's happening, I don't know if you've seen any of this, Elizabeth. We've seen some of it, and we've seen there's some litigation, I don't know if it started or not, about it, where beneficiaries who some company double registered for were found. There was a finding of fraud by probably an FDNS officer who then alerted USCIS and the consulate some way. And then that finding of fraud became a barrier to them either changing status or entering the United States. So they're using fraud by a group that is not prosecuting it through the systems in which you get due process, in which you've been ridden your rights, in which you've been arrested, in which you then can defend yourself and cross-examine, and nobody is finding them. Well, somebody's making them findings against them, but they're not making the findings by a judge or a jury. But yet it's the same punishment. I find that really wild, and a great abuse of discretion, which, if folded into the Chevron analysis, would be an interesting case for the Supreme Court to say, are these determiners outside the jurisdiction of the courts, right? So that's looking at a big law school level, let's have a conversation between lawyers thing about it. But what are any of your guys' thoughts on that? I was just thinking about it this morning. What do you think, Elizabeth, and what do you think about that, Ashley?
Well, how long is a lawsuit like that going to take, right? That employer is going to renege on that job offer well before that ever gets anywhere.
I think they're banking on that, right?
Right.
So we can just keep making these decisions, even if we don't have the authority to do it, based on something that we can't do. It's outside of our scope, right?
And by the way, we're not going to tell you what the underlying issue is, and we're just going to say it's in the admin processing in Never Neverland until you give up. That's
right. Deny you for some other reason, ties to your home country.
Right.
We're never going to tell you. Yeah, no, I think you're right. Or that definitely could happen. But right. I mean, so there's a practical answer, there's a legal answer. What do you think about the legal concept? I'm sort of spitballing, tying in some things. I don't know how right I am or where this falls down, but conceptually, what do you think they have the authority to do and why?
Still me?
Yeah.
I don't want to eat all the time.
Oh, sure.
No, conceptually, you're absolutely right. But who's going to take up that lawsuit, right? Yeah. And we've got a court right now that is far right leaning.
Do you think a far right leaning court? This is a great question. I want to hear you on this, Ashley. Do you think a far right leaning court would go with backing a government A lot of times the far right is anti-government and might think that this government, which is now a Democratic administration, so you'd be suing a Democratic official under the ex parte Young doctrine, right? That you can't sue the United States government, you can only sue officials in it. So the official would be a Democrat, right, at this point, unless there's a change. And the question is whether the government can impose a finding of fraud if they don't have the authority to find that fraud. I think that's the question. Actually, take that wherever you want it.
Yeah, I don't know. In terms of a right-leaning court, although they're, generally small government, so they say, I think when it comes to immigration,
Yeah,
they're not usually super
helpful for the
pro-immigration.
immigrant, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so
Fair enough.
anything that's gonna lean that way, I would say they probably wouldn't be leaning that way. In terms of how can we say that they're finding fraud when they don't have the authority to find fraud? I don't know. That's an interesting question, and I'd like to
And I
see
don't know if
like
it's
to
in the
see it play out.
parameters
I don't know
that
who's going to take up the litigation for it. I assume somebody will at some point, but it's going to be lengthy and expensive. So
yeah. I think
we'll have to
I
wait and
think where
see.
we're seeing some of it, and I don't know the details of it, is beneficiaries that are being found inadmissible because of the findings of fraud against petitioners in which their connection was very limited, right? That's probably the best set of facts around something like that. And I think there is some litigation that may have already started, and I think in those situations, it's interesting from a litigation point of view, and we don't do a lot of that. I think USCIS, to continue making those decisions, reopens and settles those, right? And then they're not kept from doing it. It would have to go to a court that would then find it, and then they may or may not recognize it unless it goes to a court of appeals, and then they may not recognize that unless it goes to the Supreme Court, right? So all those are arguments we see in RFEs like, hey, a district court decision doesn't impact us, or that's a different circuit from the Texas Service Center or whatever, right? I mean, we see all sorts of creative arguments on how to deny a case, I think, right?
Absolutely. I think their approach is, how do we say no?
Right. Yeah,
that's the question when they open the envelope. It's not how do we say yes.
And that's where, when we're talking about if you can't get a passport, does this agency lean towards, oh, I understand why you can't get a passport. Yeah, it's good enough. Or does this agency lean towards, you didn't meet the regulations, sorry. And I think,
and the irony is that, as Ash was saying, there's a conflict here with the court because they are right leaning, but they're pro business. But these businesses need immigrants.
Right, exactly. This is immigration in a nutshell. It's a political football. It's a political year, right? We might be seeing the prosecution of more immigration cases so that the current president who wants to remain the president is saying he's tough on immigration. Look how many denials I had, right? That this is the weirdness of our job, is that it's not this ever. It's like, these people don't like it, then these people don't like it. These people don't like it. There's nobody that loves it. There's enemies of immigration in both parties. And so they have different tactics. And that's what's immigration. And pulling it back to what can we do as attorneys is, what's the trend for this year? And how do we address it, right? I mean, how many times have we seen this, Elizabeth and Ashley, where, one was the level 1 wage that came out a couple of years ago. Where did you guys get that from? I was watching others do it before I responded to any RFEs. And then I saw that on page 34 of a Department of Labor's memorandum is where they had these levels. And here we had USCIS employing a different agency's authority and memo to deny cases, right. And it was outside of their purview, right? But what you said is, who's going to litigate that? They're getting anywhere from a few $100 to a few $1,000s to do this case. You can't take up a federal case for that amount of money, and the employers are going to say, we'll get somebody else.
That's part of that, open the envelope. How do we say no? Oh, we're going to defer to labor when it's convenient for us, but we're not when it's not. Because when you give the wage reports, like, oh, well, we don't have to comply with that. Well, when do you? Only when it's to your advantage to make a denial. Oh, okay.
That's right. It's very interesting. Yes, are you back? I see you there with a muted microphone. You want to jump in?
think it's working now.
Oh, there
But
you go.
can you
Okay.
guys,
So unfortunately,
yeah,
because
you
of
guys are coming in and
technology,
out for me, so I'm
we
sorry about that.
we ate up a lot of the time. I think we have about 2 minutes left. So why don't you tell us your impressions of what are some of the issues that we're facing now, and what do you think is going to happen in the next round? What we should be aware for in immigration under the H-1B?
H-1B, well, for me right now, I'm looking at a lot of RFEs that I think we covered it when I had that technical issue, where they're just alleging fraud left and right based on, you know, random things like, oh, your HR is the same as two other companies, but the companies are not related. Or they're going after the beneficiaries, and the beneficiaries don't even have a chance to defend themselves at this point. So I'm really interested in seeing if we can, who get some litigation in there on behalf of the beneficiaries as well, because it feels like, well, they're they've never had a chance to defend themselves, and now they're barred from immigration, or if they're saying petitions, denied because based on fraud, I don't really think even if they go back through the lottery that they'll ever get a H-1B approved. And so, you're really
They
depriving
almost
somebody
have to
of
litigate to remove that finding of fraud
to
to ever work in the United States again. And most of them
yeah,
give up. I mean, literally,
exactly.
most of them will give up, even though they
And
may
most,
have gone
yeah,
to multiple United States universities because they kept missing the lottery, right? They went and got a master's degree, they got a
yeah,
PhD. They stayed there
and a
working on
PhD degree
OPT.
afterwards.
Finally got a company that's going to apply for them, get the visa. That company's
Yeah,
then latter visas revoked. They've already moved on to another company. They're working at their job, and
Right.
all of a sudden, bam.
And you know what then? They're moving to
exactly.
Canada. They're going to Australia, right? And they're going to
We're
benefit
running
those
away.
countries.
We're running
Take
them
all
off.
that education.
100%. It's totally not in our best
And
interest.
that talent, and we honestly need that talent here. I mean, just looking at, the market, US is going to be a leader, is a leader, and if we don't have that talent coming back in here, you're putting that power back somewhere else. So it's, yeah, I'm really interested in seeing litigation based on behalf of the beneficiaries and seeing what takes us.
Yeah, let's track that. I think for next week we should look at what's been filed by who and where is it. I think that would be an interesting thing to see what's going on, just to have a conversation. I love this. It's kind of cool. I want to sum it up kind of around this to get there. So what we had when IT Serve made its decision, it was the right decision. It was saying that USCIS had overstepped their authority by asking for these intricacies because they said you don't understand the business model, which I think was a nice way to saying you don't agree with the business model. But they're saying this business model is not illegal. People can take time off. They were saying they had to, what prior to the IT Serve case, you had to show every single day your itinerary of what you were going to do. And if you couldn't, then they would chop the visa off at that point. That's what they were calling short-term approvals, right? So many people were getting approvals for their H-1B for dates that ended in the past, meaning that they couldn't start working and they've been out of status for some period of time. Many that were been out of status so long they've now been barred, right? That's what was going on. In addition to that, they just wouldn't approve it at all because you couldn't prove that it was really a job. So the court said, come on, that's not how you look at this. People don't have to know what they're doing every day. If the company can prove they have work, which I think is saying, look, we did $5 million of business last year. We project to do 5 million again this year. We have all these clients, and here's the work that we have to do. We got to hire more lawyers to do all this work. We got to hire more software developers to do all this work. This is our business model. We have a contract here. The more people we bring in, we'll be able to expand that relationship. We'll build other relationships. Is a legitimate way to do business. Again, I don't know why they have a problem with this. It's legitimate business. But yet they're denying cases over that. And now, following the IT Serve, they're approving the cases, then sending in investigators to try to find something. And the things that they're finding that they're calling fraud are not being held to the standard that would be fraud as a crime. But yet they're using it like it's a crime, right? They're finding things that the people that filed for these H-1Bs, as Yes just said, shared an HR director. Therefore, they're the same company. Well, under any definition, they're not the same company. any definition, and yet they're not even really, I mean, they can answer the RFE, but it's not a sufficient defense to really prove it out, nor is there any adjudicator, any court of law that's making these decisions for these findings of fraud. They're like, oh, we just disagree with you. We think the same HR director's fraud, so therefore it's fraud, and that beneficiary can never come in the United States again. That's what's going on right now. That is a post-IT serve. Here's what we're going to do. And we're seeing that this current administration wants that because they're trying to engage the same laws that were prior to the IT serve case again, which I think, if held up to a court, would also fall down again, right? But that's what again, they're focused on trying to kill a subset of our tech industry that is a really critical and important subset of our tech industry, right? There are American companies that want these guys. These guys, with all the layoffs of the big companies, are going in and finishing the projects to keep jobs in America and keep Americans in jobs. Yet, for some reason, they find it's their patriotic duty to deny these cases, and I just don't understand the why behind it. That's where I'm scratching my head.
Well, we're not educating enough people in STEM.
Yeah.
So we have to import the talent.
Yeah.
And this whole thing is worsened because adjudicators are not lawyers. They're often not college educated. And
they're under a policy to find ways to say no, right?
Right. Exactly. You know, a quick anecdote. My uncle was employed by INS in the 70s after he graduated law school, and he was in a room in DC in the mailroom, and they had a stamp that said deny, and they told him just stamp things.
Why?
So they're not business people.
Yeah.
They don't have an understanding of how businesses work. They're not lawyers. Coupled with the mentality of no, that spells trouble.
Clients ask me kind of big picture things all the time. It's funny how they think about it. They're like, well, do you think they're just saying no to be a deterrent? And I think the answer is yeah. I mean, they're making it hard to get visas so that it just keeps the numbers down, as opposed to just doing their job processing them, right? I mean, the decision makers should not say, you know what, we got too many immigrants in America, so I'm just going to take 30% of my cases and turn them down. I mean, that's what it feels like. I'm not saying that they're doing that, but you can feel that that there is no's for the sake of no's, and what else are you gonna do? So, hey, great conversation, Elizabeth. A pleasure to meet you and know you. Great insight. Thanks, Ashley and Yesh, for your input. Love these conversations. Does anybody want to just have a quick? I know we're a little over the 12 o'clock, but just a sound off on what you're thinking as a goodbye. Yesh, why don't you start? Then Ashley, then Elizabeth.
It's always great to be in these conversations. It's been a pleasure meeting Miss Elizabeth, and honestly, just hearing her point of her viewpoints on these. So I appreciate that. Yeah.
Thanks, Yesh. Ashley?
Yeah, H-1Bs got really interesting when I stopped working on them.
Right.
But when I was doing it, we had the level 1 issues, and then we had the issues with, programmer analyst, and then I think it moved to software developer. But these are the fraud issues this was not a thing back when I was working on H-1Bs.
Toy
yeah,
is,
so
right?
Yeah, so it's been really interesting to hear about from Yash and on these meetings. But yeah, I'm looking forward to see how it works out. I don't think there's going to be much in terms of wide range policy changes this year, just because it is an election year, and I think especially on the immigration front, things tend to stall until we get past that. But we'll see.
Thanks, Ashley. Elizabeth, your parting words.
I look forward to hearing how your electronic filings go, John. Let me know so I know for next year. And I just tell people, if you're not selected, maybe there's a creative alternative. Maybe there's an E or an O or something else that can be done, because the numbers aren't in your favor, right? With over 700,000 for 65 or 85,000 slots, you should have a backup plan. And maybe that is enrolling in a master's or a PhD.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Appreciate it. Shameless plug time. If you guys need immigration help, contact Elizabeth, contact me, Ashley, or Yesh. We'd be glad to talk to you about your immigration. If you reach out to Pierre and he'll forward either way. Shameless plug for visas.ai. Elizabeth, what we're doing is we've developed a platform to build visas, right? We felt that INS Zoom and others, Tracker, were not satisfactory to us over the years. We kept using them, going away from them. Well, we build briefs and we build all the documents around them, and it's like, USCIS may be catching up with technology for us. So what we do is we can build all of that. We have people all over the country and all over the world that help us build our cases, and that way we're able to use quality control over it, right? We're able to see what's going on and put it up there, and then we can put our entire case from start to finish. It builds it, right, from the forms to the briefs to the employment letters, contracts, all that stuff. Either they give it to us or we can build it, and then we go back up. And then we're hoping that now our package there can just be inserted in however immigration does it. And this is the evolution of technology to try to do services. Immigration and law are usually late to the game, right? But we're starting to involve AI tools in that. But as opposed to the AI telling us what to do, it allows us to give us things and look at those things and then make decisions, right? And then it's the combination of legal knowledge and our ability to look at it and make decisions with things provided to us instead of giving it for us is where we're going with it. So if you or anybody else wants to see that, we'd love to show it to you. And done with shameless plug. And hope everybody has a wonderful Friday and the rest of the week. And we'll be back next week. And Elizabeth, you're welcome to come back. We'd love to have you again. As things change, there'll be more conversations, and we'll just go from there. So
that sounds good. We'll have done a few registrations by then.
That's true. That's true. All right. Take care, everybody. Have a wonderful week. Thanks, Pierre.
Thank you, guys.